Welcome everyone. I hope you all are doing great. Thanks for joining us for today's webinar. My name is Shilpi and I'm from the digital marketing team at Minjar Cloud Solutions. Today, we are presenting our webinar on AWS Infra Security Hardening hosted by Minjar Cloud Solutions. This expert session is presented by Maqbul, our senior AWS solution architect and technical consultant, who has been helping businesses expand on AWS Cloud with our holistic cloud solutions and with the help of our product, Botmetric. Botmetric is our intelligent cloud management platform for modern enterprises that looks after all your AWS stuff, right from automation to optimization. If you wish to know more about our product, you can log into our website at www.botmetric.com, or you can even connect with us on social media for more info. We'll get started with the webinar shortly, but before we start, I would like to request you all to please cooperate and be on mute during the presentation. If you have any questions at any point of time, you can type them into the question box in your GoToWebinar control panel. I will bring them up post the presentation, and we will also have time for questions at the end. Now, further ado, let's turn the time over to Mac.
Hello guys, sorry for the delay and good morning. So I guess I had some issue with my machine and I wasn't just able to unmute myself. So hopefully it's pretty good now. So let's get started quickly. Myself, Maqbul Khan, and I'm basically a solution architect and a senior technical consultant at Minjar Cloud Solution. So our today's webinar is about AWS and underlying infrastructure hardening. So and that's let me tell you one thing. I mean, the AWS security and infrastructure hardening in and itself, it's a big domain, and I'm going to be covering pretty much basic access and label security, and would definitely try and come up again with additional security webinar in future. So let's get started quickly. So what's our today's agenda? So I'll be pretty much talking about access, authorization, and revoke, AWS account security, network security, infrastructure security, security audit, and then finally lock down your production environment, no man's land. So let's start with our first topic, access, authorization, and revoke. So this is very important aspect when we talk about the infrastructure, and especially the way cloud technology is moving, and we moving towards the automation. It's really very important aspect and area where we have to be very careful about access, authorization, and revoke. So what is this access, authorization, revoke I'm talking about? We want to make sure that we maintain proper access inventory. So every user who is trying to access our AWS account or the infrastructure, we need to make sure that there is a proper inventory management there, and we are able to track down who all users are there and who all users have been granted access to our AWS account and underlying infrastructure. The second thing is every access has to be given upon the authorization only. So it doesn't really mean that anybody in a business, in an organization can have access to it, but the access should be really as needed basis. The third one is that's really very important. So access has to be revoked immediately when there is no need. So there are different scenarios. I mean, in different organizations, different companies, access is required. Access is required basically for different tasks, and different activities users would like to perform. I mean, different companies have got different teams, and they would like to look into the different resources, so they request the access. And so when there is no need, when the job or the task is done, or let's take an example that the employee is leaving the organization, so the access has to be revoked, and it has to be taken care immediately. So why do we need access authorization revoked? So different, as I said, I mean, different organizations have different departments, teams, and their partners. So let's take a scenario. So an organization has an AWS account and underlying infrastructure. So and a possible team for the organization could be onshore IT team, who pretty much takes care of the AWS account and other important aspects, or the services, and those are basically the part of the business, and they create the account and maintain other IT services related to the business. So the other one is offshore development team. Let's assume that a business has got an offshore development team, and that also require the access to the infrastructure or the AWS account. The third one is maybe a managed service, cloud ops or DevOps team, who really takes care of the infrastructure and does the automation for them. So how do we manage and secure the AWS account and infrastructure? So so if you talk about the AWS account, what we have to deal with there is precisely pretty much AWS console access I'm talking about. And then within the AWS console, AWS has got different services. So those services has to be taken care of. And then obviously we have the underlying infrastructure, our servers, our databases. So this is all about, I'm talking about in terms of the security. So how do we make sure our account, AWS account, is secure? So the best thing in AWS is IAM and identity access management. So in that, we have got users, roles, groups, and for all of this, we have got the policies. So obviously, we can create different users and then assign different policies. We can create different roles, and we can assign different policies. We can create groups, and we can assign different policies. So let's quickly, and I'm pretty much focusing on showing you some important aspects. So let me just cover quickly, and then I'll take you to some important aspects of the security. So on the AWS account security, we have got users. We can create users. So in IAM, obviously. So a couple of important things we should make sure here in the users is we should make sure that the users we have created has got authentication enabled. So it's precisely, I'm not talking about just the username and password, but then the users should have MFA enabled. The other important aspect is, so whenever you go to create an AWS account, you get a little checkbox underneath the list of users. So normally what happens is when you hit the create user, you get 5 text boxes, and then you enter the username and then hit the next button. It asks you whether to create the access key and secret key. So be very careful. Don't just hit the button. Make sure that and ask yourself, does this user really need access key and secret key? If it doesn't, then no need to create the access key and secret key, because these access key and secret keys can be used by different resources or even from your machine to make API calls or the AWS CLI calls on your account. So, so be very careful. If you don't really need access key and secret key, don't create it. Just uncheck the checkbox you have there. Then once you have got the users created, the other important thing is check when was the last time. So this is about, you know, checking around whether the users are accessing any services. Are they active on your AWS account? Yes or no. So there is a way in the IAM itself. You can go to the specific user and check what was the last activity performed by the user on the AWS account. Then the other one is review the access key and secret key. So obviously I'm going to take you there very shortly, but so access key and secret key, if those are created, make sure that if those are not in use, either make it inactive or just completely delete it. The other one is remove the old keys which users don't really access. So let's say you got an access key and secret key there, and you figured out that the user has not used the access key and secret key for about like 100 days or 150 days. What's the point? I mean, we are literally creating and giving an option. Let's say, I mean, your keys got into the wrong-handed people, right? Into the wrong hands, right? I mean, those can be misused to disrupt your service, to attack your account. So if this, that's why I said, I mean, if you don't need the key, don't create it, right? So and if the keys are very older, just it's a best practice to rotate the keys, right? If the users are not using the keys, just completely remove them, right? Enable the API protection. So what I'm talking about is, if you guys have the access key and secret keys created, make sure that your resources are protected and cannot be terminated by the API calls. And the other one is they rotate the keys every certain period of time. So let's have a look at the, because I was talking about that you can obviously check in the IAM itself that what user have been accessing. So here is a screenshot I've taken, and as you can see there on the access advisor here, you see, I mean, the user accessed CloudFront sometime back in January, and then there was an access to the CloudWatch. Obviously, that's me, right? So and then CloudWatch access, and then DynamoDB, and then EC2. So these are basically, this is fantastic and really great way of you know, looking around to make sure that the user permissions which you have set there is appropriate, and users are accessing those services which they really need, right? I mean, as I gave a scenario, let's say I'm in development team, they are really allowed to access only the EC2 instances. Then we need to make sure that we have given granular permissions there, and they can access only the EC2 instances. And then obviously when you want to validate that, you can come back here and just double check, right? So I mean, this is a very good way when you, let's say, create policies, right? And then you can go and validate that your policies are correct or not, okay? So the other one is security credentials tab. which you get in the IAM. So this is pretty much into the users section, and I have selected a user, basically myself, and I'm just trying to show that. So if you look at there is a access key ID, and it was created some time back, and then the last use was again in February. So, and then last service I used was EC2 service, and the keys are still active. So if we really don't need that, I mean, we shouldn't have the access key and secret key. The other one is, here is where you can check whether the multi-factor authentication device is enabled and attached to your AWS account, and obviously it's been enabled and attached to my account. So we want to make sure that the users does not just log in with username and password, but they also have two-factor authentication. Right. So then we have roles. We can use these roles for different resources. For example, when we have to launch the EC2 instances, we can use the AWS IAM roles and create those roles. Make sure when you want to use the IAM roles can only be attached when you're creating an EC2 instance. Created the EC2 instance, you cannot at all attach the IAM role to that instance. So it's very important when you plan your infrastructure and resources. The other important feature of the roles is you can switch. So if you have different accounts and you want to allow the access to another account from one AWS account, you can use the switch roles. So so let's say, I mean, development team has got a separate account and you would like to allow access to the QA environment. So they can connect to the QA AWS account using the switch role. So what you need to do is you need to create a switch role into your QA account, add your development account ID there while you're creating the role, and then come back onto the dev account, and then set up the policy there, attach that policy to the group, and then probably you can use that with the group. So coming back to the group, then now that's the next one. Create different groups by different permissions. So this is very important. I mean, as I said, development team has got only the access to those resources. So I mean, there could be 10, 20, or 100 people, right? I mean, you don't have to create policy for each of the users. It's best practice. I mean, it's really good and convenient. Create a role for the user, create a role for the policy for a specific team, and attach that policy to the group, and then you can just go ahead and add the users into the specific group. So let's look at another example of you know, how do we manage this. And so I mean, let's say dev team. So this is another very important one. So we should, I mean, we strongly recommend that go around with the tagging policy. Taggings are really very important for the for managing your resources in so many different ways, and it's those are playing major role even in security. So let's quickly look at the example. So here is one of the policy which we have, and if you look here, here is the department, and the department is as set to dev. So this is a dev environment. And I mean, sorry, this is for the development team. This is the department. You have created a tag on the resource, and the action is attach and detach the volume. So that way, only the this particular department or the tag can be accessible to the specific users or to the specific team. And this can be done for different teams, and this can be used in different scenarios. So now let's move on to the next one, the network security. So this is very, very important one. I mean, when you're planning your infrastructure, you need to make sure that you are really carefully designing your VPC, and your VPC design is very, very secure. Utilize the private and public subnetting in your network design so that your infrastructure is secured, and allow only access to the required resources, or keep only those resources which really need to be into the public subnet, or could be public facing. So you can use multiple VPCs as well to create single entry point. This is really, really advanced VPC design, and you can have a single VPC as your entry point, and then you can segregate your different resources by the tiers into different VPC. Enable VPC flow logs. So these are very, very important logs, and you can get the information about your network access. So this is the new feature which AWS has recently came up, and you can see the source IPs of the users, or users trying to access or get into the infrastructure. This is really, really network level log which you can get and use that in different scenarios. So the other one is network ACL, which you can utilize and on the VPC level. And the most important one and the most utilized service, that's the security groups. And these security groups sit in front of your resources to protect, making sure you have tight and secured access rules set up on your resources. The next one is the infrastructure security. So, I mean, as I talked about the AWS console and AWS resources, AWS services. So, I mean, if you look at this way, AWS has got so many different services, as well as AWS has brought the traditional, which we used to have, though the servers and the databases we used to spin up on the data centers a few years back. Now we have got the, it's because it's a cloud technology. We have got that traditional infrastructure as well. So the thing is that we need to be very careful while working around the security. So our infrastructure, the traditional infrastructure, is also available in the AWS, as well as AWS has got their own services. For example, S3. That's AWS a unique S3 service, right? So these are the services which you have to manage through the IAM. And then when we talk about the infrastructure, so those are your really EC2 instances, your RDS instances. These are the databases and the servers which you have to maintain. So then how do we make sure that our infrastructure is secure and controlled and monitored? So some of the primary AWS services which we strongly recommend using them is enable the CloudTrail. And when you enable the CloudTrail, you can move the logs of the CloudTrail. So let's say, if you have consolidated account and you have a primary account, we really recommend that move your CloudTrail logs into your primary account. The VPC flow logs, as I just mentioned in the network security, again, if you have the primary account, consolidated account, move the logs into your primary account. So basically, how does it work is these logs go into the S3. So with the if you can leverage, if you leverage the IAM policies and roles, you can create the roles and move these logs into your primary account S3 buckets. The other one is the AWS config. So any change you make on your infrastructure, on your EC2 instance, on your network interface, on your EBS volume, any change you make, if you have enabled AWS config and configured SNS, you will immediately get a notification in your inbox that the resource has been modified. Okay, so try using the AWS config. Start using that. And then the most important one, which is there for years now, is the CloudWatch. CloudWatch can be utilized for metrics and also can be utilized for the log management. So the log management in the security domain is playing another major role and is part of the compliance, and it's really mandatory for many of the businesses. So as part of the compliance, business have to keep the logs in place for a couple of years. That completely depends on different countries' compliance. So the logs are really very important. I mean, we should not just really ignore the logs. So let's quickly move on to the next one. So so then how do we really protect our underlying infrastructure? So let me just go around the infrastructure. So what we have in our infrastructure is, let's say we have a web application, and the web application has got EC2 instances running, a simple two-tier application we're talking about. So EC2 instances running, and then we have got the RDS instance running, and so that's pretty much our infrastructure. Is how do we really protect this infrastructure? I mean, we cannot just really go and put the EC2 instance into a public subnet, which is really accessible to everybody. I mean, while we're doing load balancing, obviously we have the ELB in front of it. So the idea is we should make sure that our core infrastructure, the application tier, database tier, is in the private subnet, and then expose it through the ELB for the load balancing, and put the ELB into your public subnet. Now, when we have these in the private subnet, then how do we really access them? So whenever we set up an AWS account, we really recommend that have a jump box there, or you can call it as, I mean, jump host or jump box. This is an important, this is basically an EC2 instance I'm talking about. So and this instance can be in a public subnet, and rest of the infrastructure can be in your private subnet. So what you really need to do is, when you set up your app tier into private subnet, you just allow the IP of your jump box so that you can access your application environment, application servers, EC2 servers from the jump box. So the thing is that this way, I mean, let's say, I mean, a developer would like to connect to the environment, the application tier. So there is only one entry point. The idea is about keeping only single entry point, and rather not having different or too many entry points. So that way, I mean, we can really secure our infrastructure. So if there is only one entry point, one gate, let's say developer would like to access it, they'll have to hit or SSH into the jump box, and then they can jump from there to the application servers. The other one is, the other important thing is, I mean, it's not just about creating a user on the EC2 instance, but we strongly recommend enable multi-factor authentication, or you can also use Google Authenticator to with the SSH. So the moment you connect to the jump box, you SSH into the jump box, it'll prompt you for the verification code. So you have to enter your verification code. The other important security practice we strongly recommend is try use the public keys. So using the public keys, I mean, you don't have to, I mean, if you have to, let's say, have to maintain or have to connect to different servers, multiple servers, I mean, you will end up using different private keys for each of the servers, right? But we strongly recommend that rather than using the private keys, go and use the public keys. So what that means is when a new user is being created into the AWS account, um, that user's public key should be put into that account, his own account, and that way we can avoid, you know, flying the public PAM keys to every different users on the email, and that's a one of the very critical, I mean, thing. We shouldn't do that. I mean, that's a threat. If by mistake the key reached to the person who is not authorized to access it, I mean, can get into the machine, right? So try avoid using the private keys and go for the public keys. And if you're really using the private keys, do a practice to rotate those keys, right? The other important thing is avoid using those common users. Don't use those EC2 users. Don't use the root. Root is obviously must be disabled. Don't use the Ubuntu. Don't use the CentOS. Every user who would like to access, could be development team, could be IT team, could be the managed service team, whoever the team is there, they should have their own unique credentials to access the resource. So that way, I mean, you can secure your infrastructure. Here, I mean, it's just a small network infrastructure diagram I have created. Here is we have an EC2 instance in availability zone A, the other one is in B, and then both has got EBS volume attached. We have RDS instances. What I want to show here is the jump box here. So if somebody would like to access this environment, the user has to get into this environment only and only via the jump box. The other important thing is make sure the security group which you have attached onto this jump box, it's not exposed, or the instance is not exposed to public world. Make sure you don't do that 0.0.0.0/0. No, it should be allowed only to the specific IPs. And I mean, we strongly recommend if the access is only on as needed basis, immediately remove the IP which has been opened up, and do follow very careful change control process. Make sure that you maintain the change control process to manage your infrastructure. That really plays a major role in your infrastructure, in your infrastructure security on a long run. So so that's very important one. The additional security which we should look at is use the client VPN connectivity, use site-to-site VPN, enable the ELB logs, move your server logs to centralized location like secure log, auth log, application logs, and enable general logs on the RDS, enable S3 logs. So these are some of the important logs we should enable and maintain it separately, so that any incident we can immediately pull the logs out, and we don't want to end up reaching to the machine which has been compromised. So then comes to the security audit, and that's very important. So this is something a business or an organization really require and must start practicing this one. The audit, you can do that weekly, monthly, quarterly audit, but the audit should be done. So how do we do the security audit? I mean, we strongly recommend don't rely on the human. It could be missed out, could be ignored. I mean, make it automated, right? Make your audit automated as much as possible, and then perform the weekly, monthly, or quarterly audit on your infrastructure. So what audit? Then we have IAM. We need to make sure that users are no more there. The users who has got users don't require the access, you can probably go around and disable the users. If they need them, then you can again enable the access for them. Make sure MFA is enabled. Remove the old keys. So I'm really talking about automating all of this. I mean, we should have that in place. If you have to go around looking at all the long checklist manually, it's going to be really difficult. I mean, you cannot do that. So that's very important. Enable MFA on your root account. Don't use the access key on the root account. So these are very important security audit aspects where you have to look at. And then on the infrastructure side, make sure you have disable the SSH access for the users who are not active. Rotate the private keys of the EC2 user. Make sure the MFA two-factor authentication on the SSH has been enabled, right? Make sure the access is given on as needed basis, and SSH port is again not open to the world. ELB logs should be enabled, and ELB data transfer can be set up on the secure connection. So the final one is the one which I strongly recommend is your production environment, and it has to be no man's land. So I'm sure you must be asking that, what are you talking? I mean, no man's land. I mean, how do we manage them? Why do we want to why do we want to lock down the production environment? Well, I mean, the answer is very simple. That's where your data is stored. That's where your customers' data is stored. That's where your customers' PII is there, right? And it must be secured and should not be accessible to anyone or everyone. So I'm sure you must be getting that. How do we work with the production? How do we do the deployment? Well, I mean, the answer is very simple. I would just say do the automation. How do you do the deployments? Just do the automation. How do we troubleshoot the problem? Automation. How do we make the database changes? Well, I mean, again, automation. How do we maintain the infrastructure? Well, I mean, you have to set up new infrastructure, you have to remove the infrastructure, you have to get your EBS volume back up, you have to remove the additional EBS volumes. I mean, everything has to be automated. You cannot go around with the production environment manually. So let me just quickly explain you how this can be achieved. So provisioning the infrastructure, you can use the CloudFormation and get your production environment up and running. If you have to work with the production environment, you can write different jobs. If you have to do the deployments, use the CI/CD tools and make the deployment automation for your production environment. The next one is, what if the deployment fails, right, for any reason? Obviously, because I already mentioned, the logs plays a major role in a business. If you have maintained the logs separately outside your infrastructure, then you don't really need to access your production environment. As I said, move the logs outside your environment. So if the log access is required, your team can just be granted access to the logs only, and as soon as they do the troubleshoot, they can just go around the logs area. What I call it as CloudWatch, because we have that in the CloudWatch. So they can go in the CloudWatch, and you can grant only the access to the CloudWatch to the users and not really allow them to access the production environment. So that way they can go into the CloudWatch, look at the logs, do the troubleshooting, and then can do the deployment again. Again, use the CI/CD tool, do the deployment again. And then comes up, how do we make the database changes? Oh, well, you have to run different queries. That's fine. You have to do the inserts. That's fine. You have to run the select queries. No problem. do the automation. Again, as I said, do utilize automation tools and make the automation. The world is all about automation. That's where we have to move forward. And the final one is, again, how do we maintain our infrastructure? So I would just say use different tools for automating your infrastructure. How do we take the EBS backup, do the automation, use the tool so that your backup can be done. Take the backup of your RDS, remove the unnecessary backups from your account so that you don't end up incurring the cost. So that's pretty much what I really recommend on the production environment. Make sure it's locked down and it's really no man's land. So that's pretty much all about it, and I really appreciate you guys spend some time. Again, sorry about for the initial few minutes because of the microphone, and I really appreciate you guys spend time and join the webinar. So we have got now a couple of minutes. If you guys have any questions, you can definitely ask.
All right, thanks, Mac. I think that was really helpful. So we are open for the Q&A session right now. So I would request all the attendees, if you have any questions, please go ahead, type them up, and Mac will take them up one by one. All right, Mac, we have a question coming up from Gursimran, that how can we set up security for clients for healthcare and insurance?
That's a very good question. For the clients in healthcare and insurance, again, it depends on your requirement and your need. So obviously you can. Then the question comes up is what data you want to expose to your clients. Is there some of the files which you have put in the S3? So S3 has got very secured way, very secured way where you can really grant the access to the outside users on specific key basis. So you should definitely look on the S3 if you would like to send out different reports for your customers. So look on that side, or the other way is then you can have your application itself handle that and manage the credentials for the clients.
Okay, all right. So I think Gursimran has another question, that clients want OpenVPN for compliance prospects. So what's your take on this, Mac?
Yes, so that's basically they would like to access some of the area into your infrastructure. So in that case, what you can do is you can go around, you can set up OpenVPN, give your clients the OpenVPN client, and make sure you have unique credentials for them, and only allow the access to the resource where you would like to. Because see, the moment you have the VPN access granted, the users and the clients are part of the network. So we need to be very careful. And so here comes the security groups, and that plays a major role. So if you want to make sure that, let's say, there is no need for the clients to, obviously there is no need to access the RDS instance. You need to make sure that your RDS instance is away from the subnet range for the VPN client users, and those users are not allowed. That subnet range is not allowed on the database.
Absolutely. I do agree with you that, it's basically you need to give some just grant fine-grained access to only a few users. That's very important to understand. Okay, we'll just quickly move to the next question, Mac. There's another one coming from Paul. Is there a difference between public IP and elastic IP at AWS? It's basically, is there a security difference there?
Well, that's a good question. So what it is public IP and elastic IP let's say you launched an EC2 instance and you got a public IP on your EC2 instance. The moment you reboot your instance, you're gonna lose that public IP. So what happens is it's actually not a static IP to your instance. And if we talk about the elastic IP, the elastic IP can be attached to the EC2 instance, and then you can n number of time reboot the instance. The IP of the endpoint is not going to change. So that's pretty much the difference around the elastic IP and the public IP.
And is there a limit to the number of elastic IPs there?
So obviously different services on the account has got different soft limits, and if you hit to any of the service soft limit, you can go and open up a ticket with the AWS and increase that limit. So due to, again, security reasons, AWS has got reasonable the soft limits on different resources into different regions.
All right. So I think that answers Paul's question. We'll quickly take up another question coming up from Gajanan. When we have DBs in private subnet installed on EC2 instances, how can we enable BI tools to access the DB in a secure way?
So how can we access the BI tool? So I don't really understand what tool we really talking about, but I mean there are two things based on what I have understood is, so if the database is set up on the EC2 instance and we would like to access it, obviously then there is an app tier which requires to be talk to the EC2 instance, your database. So then you need to allow your app tier IPs or subnet range on your DB tier EC2 instances security group. And then if you would like to access it and get into the database itself, then you should allow your jump box IP on those database EC2 instance security groups so that you can get into the database. Obviously, I mean, if there is the question is not around that, then I mean, I'm always there. You can send out your detailed question to maqbul.khan@minjar.com. I'm just repeating, and it's on the visible on the screen as well. maqbul.khan@minjar.com. So I'm more than happy to answer your question at a greater length.
All right, thanks, Mac. There's the last one. We can quickly take this up. We have another 5 minutes to go. In line with what Paul wanted to know about the limit of the number of elastic IPs, he wants to know, is there a limit for public IPs as well on AWS?
No, so a public IP that really depends on the subnet, public subnet, and if you have, when you launch an EC2 instance, so you need to when you are on the console launching the EC2 instance, you have to enable, make sure if you really want that instance to be into the public subnet, you need to make sure that you have enabled the public the IP subnet configuration into that. Otherwise, if you have not enabled that, it'll take your VPC level, subnet level configuration as a default. And if you have not enabled that on the subnet level, on the VPC level, network level, you will not get the public IP. So the idea is, when you want to get a public IP on your machine, make sure that's on the public subnet, and then you have enabled that into your when you launch the EC2 instance, so that you can get the public IP on your machine, and there is no limit to that. To the public IP, AWS immediately assigns the public IP to your instance.
All right, thanks, Mac. Thanks for sharing your thoughts and tips on securing and hardening AWS Infra. Just to keep it simple for all our attendees today, we recommend that you enable MFA, rotate your keys, grant fine-grained access permissions to only a few privileged users, leverage IAM policies and roles, go along with the tagging policy to manage security and stay safe on AWS Cloud. But to ensure all this, we recommend that you run comprehensive security audit on regular basis. This will not only help you to identify the potential threat areas and security misconfigurations in your cloud infra, but it will also ensure that your cloud infra meets all the security measures and compliance. And just to see security audits and how it helps you to optimize and secure your cloud infra, you can take a 14-day free trial of Botmetric, which is our intelligent automated cloud automation tool. It meets all the 4 success pillars of AWS well-architected framework. You will get over 74 automated audits, which is available to you on Botmetric, and it ensures complete infra security, automation, and cost optimization. You can also log into our website at www.botmetric.com, where you can catch all the info about our product. With that, I'd like to thank all of you for attending this session. We really appreciate your presence. And until we are back with our next webinar, take care and keep in touch. Thanks all.